I can still hear the exact ringtone. It was a Tuesday evening, sometime around 6 o'clock. I was standing at the kitchen counter of my small apartment, chopping carrots for a soup I couldn't really afford to make fancy. But Lily loved carrots, so I bought them anyway. My phone sat face up on the counter, right next to a small floral notebook I'd been keeping for years. And when that screen lit up with the words Mom L, my whole body locked. My chest tightened first, then my shoulders, then my hands. I stopped mid-chop, knife hovering over the cutting board, and I felt that familiar wave roll through me. Dread mixed with obligation, mixed with something I couldn't name yet. Something that had been building for 3 years. The phone kept ringing, and my 7-year-old daughter, Lily, looked up from her coloring book at the kitchen table and asked me a question that would change everything. "Mama," she said softly, "why do you cry every time your phone rings?" Before I tell you what happened next, I need you to take a breath with me, because if you're here, listening to this story, I have a feeling you already know what it's like to give and give until there's nothing left. To stay loyal to people who only see your kindness as something to use. So, before we go any further, I want to ask you something. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now. What time is it there? Are you in bed, unable to sleep? Are you folding laundry, needing something to keep you company? Are you in your car, hiding from the chaos inside your house for just a few minutes of peace? Wherever you are, I want you to know you're not alone, and if stories like this one speak to something inside you, please take a moment to subscribe to Jessica's Stories Vault, because we walk these roads together here, and no woman should have to carry her story in silence. Now, let me tell you about that notebook. It was small, maybe 5 by 7 inches, with a faded floral print on the cover. Pink roses, green leaves. The kind of notebook you'd buy at a dollar store and forget about. But I hadn't forgotten it. I'd been writing in it for 3 years. Every single month, sometimes twice a month, I'd open it and record a payment, a date, an amount, a reason. March 14th, $300. Mom L's heart medication. June 2nd, $250. Furnace emergency. September 19th, $600. Emergency surgery copay. Page after page, entry after entry, my handwriting neat and careful, like I was keeping holy records. And I was, in a way. I was keeping a record of my loyalty, my sacrifice, my proof that I was still a good person, even after my marriage fell apart. What I didn't realize, what I couldn't see yet, was that I was also keeping a record of how thoroughly I'd been deceived. When Lily asked me that question, I froze, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I did. I cried every time my phone rang because I knew what was coming. Another request, another emergency, another guilt trip wrapped in sugar-sweet words like family and after everything we've done for you. And every time, I paid. Even when I was skipping meals, even when Lily was wearing shoes with holes in them because I couldn't afford new ones. Even when I postponed my own doctor visits, my own needs, my own life, I paid. Because I thought that's what good people did. I thought that's what family meant. But standing there in that kitchen, looking at my daughter's worried little face, something cracked open inside me. She was 7 years old, and she had already learned to go quiet when my phone rang. She had learned to watch my face for signs of tears. She had learned that certain sounds meant Mama would disappear into herself for the rest of the night. My baby was carrying my stress in her small body, and I hadn't even seen it. That was my blind spot. That was the thing I couldn't admit to myself for 3 years. I was so desperate to prove I was still worthy of love, so haunted by the guilt of a failed marriage, that I let people drain me dry. I told myself it was generosity. I told myself it was grace. But the truth? I was afraid. And afraid that if I stopped giving, I'd have to face what I really was to them. Not family, not someone they loved, just a source of money they'd learned how to manipulate. That night, after Lily went to bed, I sat down at the kitchen table with the floral notebook open in front of me. I flipped through every page, every entry. 3 years of payments, and when I added them up, when I finally let myself see the total, I felt my stomach drop through the floor. Over $14,000. $14,000 I didn't have. $14,000 I'd scraped together from grocery money, from skipped meals, from saying no to my daughter so I could say yes to people who were never going to say thank you. My hands started to shake, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from something waking up inside me, something that had been asleep for far too long. I turned to a fresh page in that notebook, and in handwriting that trembled just a little, I wrote one word: evidence. Pause. That question from my 7-year-old daughter would eventually save both of our lives, but to understand why it broke me open, why that single word in a floral notebook became the beginning of everything, I have to take you back to a marriage that taught me silence was the same thing as love. Let me take you back 12 years. I was 24 years old, standing in a small church on the outskirts of town, wearing a second-hand wedding dress my mother had altered to fit me. Marcus stood at the altar, looking like everything I'd ever dreamed of. Tall, steady, confident. We'd been together since junior year of high school, and I thought I knew him better than I knew myself. That was my first mistake. The wedding was simple: 60 guests, potluck reception in the church basement. His mother Linda cried during the vows and hugged me afterward like I was the daughter she'd always wanted. "Welcome to the family," she whispered in my ear. "You're one of us now." I remember feeling my chest swell with warmth. I had lost my father when I was 16, and my relationship with my own mother was complicated at best. So when Linda opened her arms to me, I walked right in. I didn't know I was walking into a trap dressed up as love. The cracks appeared almost immediately. Marcus worked long hours at the warehouse, 12-hour shifts, sometimes 6 days a week. I understood that. I respected it. But when he came home, he didn't come home to me. He came home to the couch, to the television, to a silence that felt heavier than any words. When I tried to talk to him about my day, he'd grunt. When I asked about his, he'd say fine and change the channel. When I told him I felt lonely, he looked at me like I was speaking another language. "I work all day to provide for you," he said once, his voice flat and cold. "What more do you want from me?" I didn't have an answer. Or maybe I did, but I'd already learned it wasn't safe to say it. Linda made sure of that. That she'd come over for dinner once a week, and she had a way of weaving little lessons into the conversation. "Men aren't like us," she'd say, patting my hand while Marcus sat silent in the living room. "They show love differently. A good wife learns to adjust." Adjust. That word became my religion. I adjusted my expectations. I adjusted my voice, made it softer, smaller, less likely to disturb. I adjusted my dreams until they fit inside the tiny box Marcus had built for me. I stopped asking for what I needed because needing things made me too emotional. I stopped crying in front of him because tears made me dramatic. I stopped being myself because myself wasn't good enough. And somewhere along the way, I stopped recognizing the woman in the mirror. I got pregnant 2 years into the marriage, and I thought a baby might fix things, might make Marcus see me again. might make him come back to life. I worked right up until my 8th month, taking night classes to become a medical billing clerk because Marcus said we needed the extra income. I was exhausted all the time. My feet swelled, my back ached, but I kept going because that's what good wives did. That's what Linda told me anyway. And then Lily was born. My beautiful, perfect, brown-eyed girl. The moment I held her, I felt something shift in my chest. A fierce, protective love I'd never experienced before. I thought Marcus would feel it too. I was wrong. He held her for exactly 3 minutes before handing her back and saying he needed sleep. He started staying out later after that, coming home irritable, snapping at me for things that didn't make sense. Once, when Lily was about 6 months old, I asked him to hold her while I showered. Just 15 minutes. He looked at me with something close to disgust and said, "You've let yourself go. Maybe if you took better care of yourself, I'd want to come home." I stood there holding my baby, water still running in the bathroom, and felt something inside me go cold. But I didn't leave. I didn't argue. I just nodded and adjusted. Again. The years blurred together after that. I worked. I raised Lily. I kept the house clean and the dinners hot and my mouth shut. I performed happiness like it was a job I couldn't afford to lose, and every time I thought about leaving, Linda's voice would echo in my head. "Family doesn't give up. Marriage takes sacrifice. You made a vow before God." So I stayed. Not because I was happy, not because I was loved, but because I was terrified of what it would mean if I walked away. It would mean I had failed. It would mean the last 8 years had been a waste. It would mean admitting that the life I'd built was a lie. I remember one evening, Lily was maybe 4 years old. I was standing at the kitchen sink washing dishes. I heard Marcus's car pull into the driveway, and my stomach did that familiar drop. Hope and dread, twisted together so tightly I couldn't tell them apart anymore. I listened to his footsteps on the porch, listened to the door open, listened to him walk past me without a word, straight to the television. And I realized, with a clarity that made my hands go still in the soapy water, that I had become invisible in my own home. I was there, but I wasn't seen. I was breathing, but I wasn't alive. I was married, but I was utterly, completely alone. For 8 years, I convinced myself that silence was loyalty, that endurance was love, that if I just kept adjusting, kept shrinking, kept performing, eventually he would see me. Eventually it would be worth it. But eventually never came. And one cold November evening, Marcus sat me down at the kitchen table and told me he was done pretending. The divorce was quieter than I expected. No screaming, no fighting over furniture, no dramatic courtroom scenes like you see in the movies. Marcus simply announced he was done, packed a bag, and moved into an apartment across town. Within 6 months, the papers were signed, and I was officially a single mother at 32 years old. The strange thing was, I didn't cry when it was finalized. I sat in my car outside the courthouse, holding the documents in my lap, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. My chest was lighter. My shoulders weren't up around my ears. For the first time in almost a decade, I didn't have to perform happiness for anyone. I could just exist. But relief has a way of wearing off, and loneliness has a way of creeping in when you least expect it. Marcus disappeared from Lily's life almost immediately. Yet he'd send birthday cards with checks inside, never showing up to the actual parties. He'd promise weekend visits that never happened. Lily would sit by the window waiting for his car, and I'd watch her little face fall when the hours passed and he didn't come. Eventually, she stopped asking about him. That broke my heart more than anything Marcus had ever done to me. But here's the thing I didn't expect. Linda kept calling. My ex-mother-in-law, the woman who had spent 8 years teaching me to shrink myself, suddenly became the most consistent presence in my post-divorce life. At first, I was confused. Then, I was touched. The first call came about 2 weeks after the divorce was finalized. I saw her name on my phone and almost didn't answer. But something in me, that old habit of obligation, made me pick up. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice warm and grandmotherly. "I've been thinking about you and Lily so much. I know things didn't work out with Marcus, but I want you to know. You're still part of this family. Lily is my granddaughter. That bond doesn't break." I felt tears prick my eyes. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear those words. My own mother had passed away 2 years before the divorce, and my relationship with my sister was strained at best. I was alone in almost every way a person could be alone. So when Linda said I was still family, I grabbed onto it like a lifeline. "Thank you," I whispered. "That means more than you know." She called every week after that, sometimes just to chat, sometimes to ask about Lily. She remembered Lily's favorite foods, asked about her school projects. I sent little cards in the mail with $5 bills tucked inside. And slowly, I started to believe that maybe something good had survived the wreckage of my marriage. Maybe I hadn't lost everyone after all. But then, about 3 months in, the calls started to shift. It was subtle at first, so subtle I almost missed it. She'd mention how hard things were since Marcus's father passed, how the medical bills were piling up, how her heart condition was acting up again, and the insurance didn't cover everything. I made sympathetic noises, offered words of comfort, and then one evening, she asked directly. "I hate to even bring this up," she said, her voice trembling just slightly. "But I'm in a bit of a bind with my medication costs. The pharmacy wants $400 for my heart pills, and I just don't have it right now. I was wondering, and please, say no if you can't, but could you help me out? Just this once?" My stomach tightened. I was barely making rent. I'd just started a new job as a medical billing clerk, and after daycare costs and groceries and utilities, there was almost nothing left. But this was Linda, the woman who had welcomed me into her family, the woman who helped throw Lily's first birthday party, the woman who called me sweetheart and told me I still mattered. Family helps family. That's what she'd always said. And I still wanted so desperately to be part of a family. "Of course," I heard myself say. "I can send 300. Will that help?" The relief in her voice was immediate. "Oh, sweetheart, you are such a good girl. Marcus doesn't know what he lost. I'll pay you back as soon as I can, I promise." I wrote the check that night, and then I did something that would become a ritual for the next 3 years. I opened a small floral notebook I'd bought at the dollar store, and I recorded the payment. March 14th, $300. Mom L's heart medication. I don't know why I started keeping track. Maybe some part of me, some quiet, watchful part, already sensed that I would need a record someday. Or maybe I just needed to see my generosity in writing to convince myself it was real. That I was good. That this sacrifice meant something. After I wrote that first entry, I closed the notebook and tucked it in my kitchen drawer. My hands felt strange, a little cold, a little shaky. There was a knot in my gut that I couldn't quite explain. Something whispered at the back of my mind, too quiet to hear clearly. Something that said this didn't feel right. But I pushed it down. I told myself I was being paranoid. Linda was elderly. She was sick. She had been nothing but kind to me since the divorce. What kind of person would I be if I refused to help? So I ignored the whisper. I silenced the knot in my stomach. I convinced myself that this was what family looked like. sacrifice and generosity and being there for each other when times got hard. That first check felt like grace, like I was being the bigger person, like I still mattered to someone. I didn't know that it was the first link in a chain I wouldn't see for 3 years. The calls became routine. Every 4 to 6 weeks, like clockwork, my phone would ring and Linda's name would appear on the screen. And every time, there was a new crisis waiting on the other end. The furnace broke, and she needed it fixed before winter set in. Marcus lost his job and needed help with rent. Just temporarily. Just until he got back on his feet. Her medication costs went up again because the insurance company changed her plan. The car needed repairs so she could get to her doctor appointments. Each crisis was urgent. Each crisis was heartbreaking. And each crisis required my help. I became her emergency fund, the person she called when things fell apart. And I answered every single time because that's what family does. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. The floral notebook became my ritual. Every time I sent money, and I would sit down at my kitchen table after Lily went to bed and carefully record the payment. Date, amount, reason. My handwriting stayed neat and careful, even as the amounts grew larger. $300 became $400. $400 became $500. And then one month, Linda's voice trembling on the phone, she asked for $600. Just this once, sweetheart. I promise I'll pay you back. I remember staring at my bank account that night. I had $842 to last until my next paycheck. Rent was due in a week. The electric bill was overdue. Lily needed new shoes because her toes were pressing against the front of her old ones. But Linda was family, and family came first. So I sent the $600 and told myself I would figure it out. I always figured it out. I want to pause here and ask you something. Have you ever given and given to someone only to realize they never saw it as generosity? They saw it as something they were owed? If you know that feeling, tell me in the comments. You don't have to explain. Just say, I've been there. Because I think a lot of us have. And there's something powerful about knowing you're not alone in that kind of pain. The sacrifices started small and grew larger. I stopped buying coffee on my way to work. That was $5 a day I couldn't spare. I started eating rice and beans 4 nights a week because a bag of dried beans cost less than $2 and could stretch for days. I skipped meals entirely sometimes, telling myself I wasn't hungry while my stomach growled and my hands shook. But Lily always had fresh fruit. Lily always had what she needed. I made sure of that, even when it meant I had nothing left for myself. One afternoon, Lily came home from school with a permission slip for a field trip to the Children's Museum. Her eyes were bright with excitement as she handed me the paper. Everyone's going, Mama. Can I go too, please? I looked at the cost printed at the bottom of the page, $35 for the bus and admission. $35 I didn't have because I'd sent $400 to Linda the week before for a plumbing emergency. I'm sorry, baby, I said, my voice catching in my throat. Money's just really tight right now. Maybe next time. The light went out of her eyes. She nodded quietly, took the permission slip back, and went to her room without another word. I stood in the kitchen feeling like the worst mother in the world, but my chest ached with the shame so heavy I could barely breathe, and somewhere in the back of my mind, that whisper grew a little louder. Something isn't right. But I buried it. I always buried it, because the alternative was too painful to consider. If I admitted something was wrong, I would have to admit that I'd been used, that my generosity meant nothing, that the family I'd clung to so desperately was never really mine at all. So I kept paying, and the notebook kept filling. Sometimes I would hesitate. Sometimes, when Linda called with another request, I would pause just a moment too long. And that's when her voice would change. The warmth would drain away, replaced by something sharp and cold. "After everything I've done for you," she would say. "After I welcomed you into this family when your own mother was gone. I thought you were different. I thought you understood what family means. I guess I was wrong about you." The words landed like blows. I would feel my face flush with shame, my hands trembling as I apologized. "No, no, of course I'll help. I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" "I knew I could count on you," she'd say, the warmth returning instantly. "You're such a good girl." And then there was Marcus. One evening, about 1.5 years after the divorce, my phone rang with a number I hadn't seen in months. His number. My heart lurched when I answered. Some foolish part of me thought maybe he was calling about Lily. Maybe he wanted to see her. Maybe he'd finally decided to be a father. But his voice was cold and clipped. "My mother told me you've been giving her a hard time about money," he said. "She's elderly and sick, and you're making her beg." Don't embarrass me." The line went dead before I could respond. I stood there with the phone pressed to my ear, listening to silence, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. I hadn't given anyone a hard time. I'd hesitated for 30 seconds, and somehow, that hesitation had been twisted into cruelty. That night, I opened the floral notebook and counted the entries. Page after page after page, 2 years of payments. And not once, not a single time, had anyone said thank you without following it with another request. The heaviness in my shoulders became permanent. It was there when I woke up. It was there when I went to sleep. It pressed down on me like a weight I couldn't shake, no matter how much I tried to rest. I started getting headaches that wouldn't go away. My jaw ached from clenching it in my sleep. I looked in the mirror one morning and saw a woman I barely recognized, tired, worn down, hollowed out from the inside. But still I paid. Because I believed I owed them. For the marriage, for the years, for failing to keep the family together. I was a single mom drowning in guilt the size of a mountain, and they knew exactly how to climb it. For 3 years, I bled myself dry in $400 increments, and never once, not a single time, did I ask to see a medical bill. That was my mistake, but my 7-year-old was about to correct it. Now we've come full circle. Back to that Tuesday evening, back to the kitchen, back to the moment that changed everything. I was standing at the counter, chopping carrots for soup because Lily loved carrots, and I could never say no to her, even when money was tight. The floral notebook sat on the counter beside me, closed but ever present. I'd been recording payments in it for 3 years now. So many pages filled that I'd had to tape extra sheets into the back. My phone was face up on the counter. I always kept it face up because I was afraid of missing Linda's calls. Missing a call meant a follow-up call with that sharp edge in her voice. Missing a call meant guilt I couldn't afford to carry. So I watched that phone like it was a ticking bomb, and then when it lit up with the words Mom, L, my whole body responded before my mind even caught up. My chest tightened first. Then my shoulders climbed toward my ears. Then my hands, still holding the knife, began to tremble. It was a physical response I couldn't control anymore. Pavlovian, trained into me over 3 years of calls that always ended with less money in my account and more weight on my shoulders. The ringtone filled the small kitchen. That cheerful little melody that used to sound so innocent. Now it made my stomach lurch. Now it made my throat close up. Now it made me want to throw the phone across the room and watch it shatter against the wall. But I didn't. I never did. I just stood there, frozen, waiting for the strength to answer. And that's when Lily looked up. She was sitting at the kitchen table with her coloring book open in front of her. Crayons scattered everywhere. A half-finished picture of a rainbow that she'd been working on all afternoon. But she wasn't coloring anymore. She was watching me. Her big brown eyes, so much like her father's, but softer, kinder, were fixed on my face with an expression that made my heart crack right down the middle. Worry. My 7-year-old daughter was worried about me. "Mama," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why do you cry every time your phone rings?" The question hit me like a fist to the chest. I stopped breathing. The knife slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the cutting board. The phone kept ringing, but I couldn't hear it anymore. All I could hear was my daughter's voice asking a question I didn't have an answer for. Or maybe I did have an answer. Maybe that was the problem. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I saw what I'd done. Lily had learned to go quiet when the phone rang. I'd noticed it before, but never let myself think about what it meant. She'd learned to watch my face for signs of tears. She'd learned not to ask for things because Mama always said money was tight. She'd learned that certain sounds meant I would disappear into myself for the rest of the evening. Distracted and distant and unreachable. My daughter was 7 years old, and she was already carrying my stress in her small body. She was already learning to shrink herself to make room for my pain, just like I had done in my marriage, just like I had done my whole life. The phone stopped ringing. Voicemail picked up. I didn't care. For the first time in 3 years, I let a call from Linda go unanswered. Instead, I crouched down so I was eye level with my daughter. I pulled her into my arms and held her tight, breathing in the smell of her strawberry shampoo, feeling her small hands pat my back the way I'd taught her to do when someone was sad. "I don't know, baby," I whispered into her hair. "But I'm going to figure it out. I promise." That night, after Lily was asleep, I sat down at the kitchen table with the floral notebook open in front of me. My hands were shaking as I turned the pages, page after page of my own handwriting. 3 years of entries, 3 years of sacrifice, 3 years of bleeding myself dry for people who had never once asked if I was okay. I grabbed a calculator from the junk drawer and started adding. March 2019, $300. April 2019, $250. June 2019, $400. September 2019, $450. The numbers climbed higher and higher. I kept punching them in, my fingers moving mechanically while my mind went numb. When I finally hit the total button, I felt my stomach drop through the floor. $14,275. I stared at that number for a long time. $14,000 I didn't have. $14,000 I'd scraped together from skipped meals and secondhand shoes and field trips Lily never got to take. $14,000 I'd given away because I was desperate to be loved, because I was terrified of being alone, because I believed that I owed them something for the failure of my marriage. My hands were shaking harder now, but it wasn't fear. It was something else, something hotter, something that had been sleeping inside me for years and was finally starting to wake up. A question surfaced in my mind, one I'd been suppressing for 3 years. Where did all that money actually go? I'd never asked for receipts. I'd never asked to see a medical bill. I'd never asked for proof of anything because asking questions made me selfish. Asking questions made me ungrateful. Asking questions made me heartless. That's what they told me anyway, and I believed them. But looking at that number, $14,275, something shifted in my chest. I closed my eyes and took a breath. Then I turned to a fresh page in the floral notebook, and in handwriting that trembled just slightly, I wrote one word at the top: evidence. I didn't know what I would find, but part of me was terrified I was wrong, that I really was the ungrateful, heartless woman they said I was, that the money had gone exactly where they said it went, and I was just being paranoid. But a bigger part of me, the part that had been asleep for too long, whispered something different. It whispered, "Look closer." And so I did. I made a decision that night, sitting at my kitchen table with the floral notebook open and that terrible number staring back at me. I decided I wasn't going to confront anyone. Not yet. Maybe not ever, because I knew exactly what would happen if I did. Linda would cry. She would make excuses. She would twist my words until I was the villain. She would call me ungrateful and selfish and heartless, and by the end of the conversation, I would be apologizing and sending another check. I'd been through that cycle too many times to count. I knew how it ended. So instead of confronting, I decided to investigate, quietly, carefully. Like gathering stones before you build a wall. The first thing I did was start saving everything. Every text message Linda sent me, and I screenshotted and saved to a folder on my phone labeled Receipts. Every voicemail she left, I kept instead of deleting. My state was a one-party consent state, which meant I could legally record our phone calls without telling her. So I downloaded an app and started recording. I felt a little sick doing it, like I was betraying someone who trusted me. But then I remembered that number, $14,000, and I kept recording. I went through my bank statements too, printing out every transaction that went to Linda's account. I matched them to the entries in my floral notebook, making sure every date and amount lined up. They did. My records were meticulous. I had that going for me, at least. But bank statements and text messages only told half the story. They showed what I had given. They didn't show where it had actually gone. For that, I needed something else. I needed eyes inside their world. That's when I thought of Dana. Dana was my cousin on my mother's side. We'd grown up together, more like sisters than cousins. She was one of the few people who'd stayed connected to Marcus's family after the divorce, mostly through social media. She wasn't close to them, but she followed them. Liked their posts occasionally. Stayed in the loop. I called her one evening after Lily was in bed. We talked about nothing for a while. Her job, her kids, the weather. And then, as casually as I could manage, I asked, "Hey, this might sound weird, but could you send me some screenshots from Linda's Facebook? And Marcus's, if you can. I'm trying to figure some things out." Dana didn't ask questions. That's one of the things I love about her. She just said, "Give me an hour," and hung up. An hour later, my phone buzzed with a series of images. My hands were trembling as I opened them. The first screenshot was from Linda's profile, a post from 6 months ago showing a brand new patio set. Wicker furniture with bright blue cushions, a matching umbrella, potted plants arranged artfully around the edges. The caption read, "Finally got my outdoor oasis. Summer is going to be wonderful." My stomach lurched. I checked my notebook. 6 months ago, I had sent $450 for Linda's emergency dental work. The next screenshot was from a year ago. Linda and 2 women I didn't recognize, posing on a beach with drinks in their hands. The geotag said, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. The caption read, "Girls trip, we deserve this." I checked my notebook again. A year ago, as I had sent $500 because Linda's heart medication costs went up, My throat was closing. My jaw clenched so tight it ached. I kept scrolling. There was more. So much more. A casino trip with her church friends, a new living room set, a weekend at a spa resort for her birthday. Every single photo, every single purchase, every single vacation, they all lined up with my payments. The money I thought was keeping her alive was funding a lifestyle I couldn't even dream of. While I was eating rice and beans, she was eating crab legs at Myrtle Beach. While Lily wore shoes with holes in them, Linda was getting pedicures at a spa. While I skipped my own doctor appointments, she was gambling at a casino with money I had scraped from our grocery budget. I sat in my car outside of work the next day during my lunch break, staring at those screenshots on my phone, and I cried. Not quiet, dignified tears, ugly, choking sobs that shook my whole body. 3 years. 3 years of sacrifice and guilt and fear, and none of it had been real. None of it had been necessary. They had used me like an ATM. They had seen my kindness, my desperation to belong, my fear of being abandoned, and they had harvested it, systematically, deliberately, without a shred of remorse. When I finally stopped crying, I texted Dana 2 words. Don't tell anyone. That night, I sat down with the floral notebook and documented everything. I wrote the dates of my payments on one side and the dates of Linda's social media posts on the other. I printed out the screenshots and taped them to the pages beside my own handwriting. The evidence was undeniable. It was right there in front of me, and in my own careful records and their careless posts. But even then, even with all of it staring me in the face, a voice crept into my head. Linda's voice. That sharp, disappointed tone she used when I asked too many questions. Maybe you're being paranoid. Maybe they paid for those things another way. You always were suspicious. You always were difficult. You're probably overreacting, just like you always do. I almost closed the notebook. I almost convinced myself that I was wrong, that I was crazy, that I was the ungrateful woman they said I was. If you're watching this and you see yourself in any part of this story, I want you to know something. You're not crazy, and you're not alone. Before I show you what happened next, take a second to subscribe if this story is speaking to you. I share these stories because I wish someone had told me sooner. Your gut is smarter than your guilt. Trust it. I sat there for a long time, that voice in my head warring with the evidence in front of me. And then, slowly, another voice rose up, quieter, steadier. My own voice, the one I'd silenced for so many years. It said, "No, trust yourself this time." I didn't close the notebook. I turned to a fresh page instead. I had the evidence in front of me, my own handwriting next to their vacation smiles, my sacrifices next to their luxuries. The truth was right there, and I wasn't going to look away from it anymore. But just when I thought I'd seen the worst of it, my phone buzzed. Dana had sent one more photo, and this one made my blood turn to ice. The photo was from Marcus's Facebook page, posted 8 months ago. I stared at it so long that my phone screen dimmed twice, and I had to tap it to keep the image visible. It was a kitchen, a beautiful, gleaming, brand new kitchen. White shaker cabinets with brushed nickel handles, granite countertops in a swirl of gray and white, stainless steel appliances that looked like they'd never been touched, a farmhouse sink with one of those fancy pull-down faucets, pendant lights hanging over a center island. The kind of kitchen I used to point to in magazines and say, someday. The kind of kitchen I'd stopped dreaming about because dreaming hurt too much. And there was Marcus, standing in the middle of it with his arms spread wide and a grin on his face like he'd just conquered the world. The caption underneath made my vision blur. Finally finished the kitchen. Took a year, but worth every penny. Thanks, Ma, for the vision. Thanks, Ma, for the vision. I read those words 3 times, letting them sink into my bones. My hands had gone cold. That feeling you get when your body knows something terrible before your mind catches up. I scrolled to check the date on the post. October, 8 months ago. October. With trembling fingers, I reached for the floral notebook. I flipped backwards through the pages, my eyes scanning my own handwriting until I found what I was looking for. September, 1 month before that kitchen was revealed, I had sent $600. The reason I'd written, Mom L's emergency surgery copay. I kept flipping. August, $450. Mom L's heart medication refill. July. Oh, $400. Linda's medical transport to specialist. June, $500. Emergency plumbing at Linda's house. I did the math in my head. In the 4 months leading up to that kitchen reveal, I had sent nearly $2,000. $2,000 scraped from grocery money and skipped meals and shoes I told Lily we'd buy next month. $2,000 I believed was keeping an elderly woman alive. But it wasn't keeping anyone alive. It was buying granite countertops. It was paying for stainless steel appliances. It was funding a kitchen renovation that took a year to complete, a year during which I received monthly emergency calls begging for help. The timeline wasn't just suspicious. It was undeniable. Every single major payment I'd made lined up with a new purchase, a new project, a new luxury. And they hadn't been surviving on my money. They'd been upgrading. A wave of nausea rolled through me so strong, I had to put my head between my knees. I sat on my bed, phone in one hand and notebook in the other, and I felt something I can only describe as being gutted. Not angry. Not yet. Just hollow. Like someone had reached inside my chest and scooped out everything that made me human. For 3 years, I had sacrificed. For 3 years, I had believed I was helping. For 3 years, I had told myself that this was what family looked like. That love meant giving until you had nothing left. And it was all a lie. Every single bit of it. They had looked at me, at my guilt, my loneliness, my desperate need to belong, and they had seen an opportunity. Not a daughter, not a sister, not family, an ATM with a heartbeat. The betrayal cut deeper than the divorce ever did. When Marcus left, at least I understood what was happening. The marriage was broken. We grew apart. These things happen. But this was something else entirely. This was calculated. This was deliberate. This was 3 years of manipulation, designed to extract as much money as possible from a woman they knew was too guilty and too scared to say no. I thought about all the times I'd eaten rice and beans while Linda posted beach vacation photos. I thought about Lily's shoes with the holes in them, and the field trip she never got to take, and the guilt on her little face when she asked for things I couldn't afford. I thought about the doctor's appointments I'd postponed, the dental work I'd put off, the exhaustion that had settled into my bones and never left. And I thought about that kitchen, that beautiful, gleaming kitchen, built on my suffering, built on my daughter's second-hand clothes, built on 3 years of my life that I would never get back. Something hardened inside me. I felt it happen, a wall going up, brick by brick, around the soft parts of my heart that had allowed this to happen. It wasn't cold. It wasn't bitter. It was protective. Like my body finally understood what my mind had been too afraid to accept. These people were not my family. They never were. I saved every screenshot Dana had sent me. I printed them out at the library the next day, feeding quarters into the machine while Lily read picture books at a nearby table. I taped each photo into the floral notebook, matching them with my payment entries. Vacation photos next to medical emergency payments. Kitchen renovation next to surgery copay. Patio furniture next to medication costs. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, complete. That night, after Lily was asleep, I sat alone in my kitchen, my small, outdated, perfectly adequate kitchen, and I recorded a voice memo on my phone. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I needed to hear my own voice speaking the truth. Maybe I needed proof that I wasn't crazy. Maybe I just needed to say the words out loud so they would become real. They lied to me, I whispered into the phone. They used me. They took $14,000 from me and spent it on vacations and kitchens and things I could never afford. And I have proof. I have proof, and I'm not crazy, and I'm not imagining things. This happened. This really happened. I played that recording back 3 times. Each time, my voice sounded a little steadier, a little stronger, a little more like the woman I used to be before I learned to shrink. I sat with that photo for a long time. Marcus's smiling face in that gleaming kitchen, built on my grocery money and my daughter's secondhand shoes. I finally understood the truth I'd been running from for 3 years. I wasn't family. I was never family. I was a funding source with a guilt complex. And it was time, past time, to cut off the supply. For 2 weeks, I did nothing. I had the evidence. I had the proof. I had the floral notebook filled with my careful handwriting on one side and their vacation photos taped on the other. I had screenshots and bank statements and voice recordings. I had everything I needed to prove that I wasn't crazy, that I'd been systematically deceived for 3 years, but I had no idea what to do with any of it. Every night after Lily went to bed, I would sit at the kitchen table and stare at that notebook. I'd flip through the pages, looking at the evidence I'd gathered, and my mind would spin through possibilities. Each one felt worse than the last. I imagined confronting Linda, calling her up and laying it all out, the screenshots, the dates, the undeniable pattern of lies. But even as I imagined it, I knew exactly how it would go. She would cry first. That trembling, wounded voice she used so well. After everything I've done for you, after I welcomed you into this family when no one else wanted you. Then the excuses would come. The renovations were gifts from other family members. The vacations were paid for by friends. The money I sent really did go to medical bills. It was just a coincidence that everything lined up. And if I pushed back, if I refused to believe her, the tears would turn to ice. I always knew you were ungrateful. I told Marcus you'd turn on us eventually. You were never really family. By the end of the conversation, I would be apologizing. I always ended up apologizing. I imagined calling Marcus, his voice cold and dismissive, the way it always was when he bothered to speak to me at all. My mother told me you're harassing her with accusations. What's wrong with you? Are you really this jealous and bitter? He would tell me I was crazy. He would tell me I was making things up. He would twist everything until I was the villain, and he would hang up before I could defend myself. Just like he always did. Then I imagined telling someone else, a friend, a coworker. My sister, maybe, even though we barely spoke anymore. And that's when the shame hit me like a wave. I realized with a sick feeling in my stomach that I had told no one about this. Not a single person. For 3 years, I had carried this burden completely alone. I hadn't told anyone because I was embarrassed. Because some part of me believed it was my fault. Because I thought if I admitted what was happening, people would look at me the way I looked at myself, as someone weak and stupid and desperate enough to be fooled by people who never loved her at all. The isolation of that realization was suffocating. I sat at my kitchen table with my head in my hands, and I cried. Not angry tears this time, just exhausted ones. The kind of tears that come when you've been carrying something too heavy for too long, and you finally feel the full weight of it. One evening, I was sitting on the couch helping Lily with her homework. 2nd grade math, adding and subtracting 2-digit numbers. Simple stuff, but she liked when I sat with her. She said it helped her concentrate. I was watching her work through a problem, her little tongue poking out of the corner of her mouth the way it always did when she was thinking hard, and she suddenly looked up at me. Mama, she said. You look really tired. Not worried this time, not scared. Just a simple observation from a 7-year-old who is paying attention. You look tired, Mama. I reached out and smoothed her hair back from her face. I'm okay, baby. Just have a lot on my mind. She nodded like she understood, even though she couldn't possibly understand, and went back to her math problem. But something clicked into place in that moment. Something I hadn't been able to see before. Lily needed a mother. Not a martyr. Not a woman who was slowly disappearing under the weight of obligation and fear and guilt. She needed a mother who could be present. Who could laugh without forcing it. Who could answer the phone without flinching. She needed me to show her what strength looked like. And strength, I realized, didn't always look like a fight. Sometimes strength looked like walking away. Sometimes it looked like refusing to engage. Sometimes it looked like simply, quietly, finally saying no. I made my decision that night. No confrontation. No dramatic phone call. No announcement. I wasn't going to expose them or argue with them or try to make them understand what they'd done. I wasn't going to waste another minute of my life trying to prove my worth to people who had never seen me as anything more than a source of income. I was just going to stop. Stop sending money. Stop answering calls. Stop participating in my own exploitation. That was it. That was the whole plan. I rehearsed it in my mind as I got ready for bed. The phone would ring. I would see Linda's name on the screen, and instead of my stomach dropping and my hands shaking and my throat closing up, I would do something different. I would let it go to voicemail, or I would answer and say calmly and firmly, I can't help right now. And then I would hang up. No explanation, no apology, no negotiation, just no. The thought of it made my whole body tremble. Years of conditioning screamed at me that I couldn't do this, that I was being cruel, that I was abandoning someone who needed me. But another voice, quieter, steadier, my own voice, whispered something different. They never needed you. They used you, and you are allowed to stop letting them. I went to my bedroom and opened the drawer of my nightstand. I placed the floral notebook inside, not hidden in the back, not shoved under papers, but right on top where I could see it. My record. My proof. My line in the sand. Then I closed the drawer and stood there for a moment, on my hand resting on the nightstand, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. It was fragile, delicate, easily broken, but it was there, flickering in my chest like a candle in a dark room. Hope. I was terrified of what would happen next. Terrified of the guilt and the anger and the accusations that I knew were coming. But beneath the terror, there was something else. A steadiness I didn't know I still had. I didn't plan a speech. I didn't rehearse a confrontation. I just decided, quietly and finally, that I was done. The next time my phone rang with Linda's name on the screen, I would find out exactly who I was. 3 weeks passed. 3 weeks of waiting for the phone to ring. My stomach tight every time I checked my notifications. 3 weeks of telling myself I was ready, while some terrified part of me prayed the call would never come. But of course it came. It always came. It was a Thursday afternoon when I saw her name light up my screen. Mom, Elle. My heart lurched the way it always did. That Pavlovian response I couldn't seem to shake. My hands reached for the phone automatically, muscle memory from 3 years of obedience. But then I stopped. I stared at the screen as it rang once, twice, 3 times. My thumb hovered over the green button. Every cell in my body screamed at me to answer. To apologize for being unavailable. To ask what she needed. To fix whatever problem had prompted the call. But I didn't answer. And I watched the screen until the ringing stopped and the notification appeared. One new voicemail. Then I set the phone down, walked to the kitchen, and made myself a cup of tea with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. I listened to the voicemail an hour later, after Lily was settled with her homework. Linda's voice was warm, cheerful, completely normal. Hi, sweetheart. Just checking in. Haven't heard from you in a while. Give me a call when you get a chance. Love you. Love you. I almost laughed. The words that used to make me feel like I belonged now sounded hollow. Scripted. Like something she said because it worked, not because it was true. I didn't call back. 2 days later, the phone rang again. This time, I was at work, sitting at my desk processing medical claims, when my personal phone buzzed in my purse. I glanced at the screen and felt my chest tighten. Mom, Elle. I silenced it and went back to work. The voicemail she left was different this time. Tighter. Less warm. Hi, it's me. I've been trying to reach you. I have some bills coming up and I really need to talk to you. Call me back as soon as you can. I could hear it in her voice, the slight edge beneath the sweetness. The first hint of irritation. I saved the voicemail, added a note in my phone with the date and time, and went back to work. I didn't call back. The third call came 3 days after that. I was making dinner when my phone lit up, and this time I answered. Not because I wanted to, but because I knew I needed to face it eventually. Better to do it on my terms, while Lily was in her room, and I had a moment to myself. Hello? I said, keeping my voice neutral. Linda didn't bother with pleasantries. I don't know what's going on with you, she said, her voice cold and sharp. But I need that help we discussed. I've left you multiple messages. This isn't like you. I took a breath. My hands were trembling, but my voice stayed steady. I'm not able to help financially right now. Silence on the other end, just for a moment, long enough for me to imagine the shock on her face, then the explosion. After everything I've done for you? Her voice rose, trembling with fury. After I welcomed you into this family when your own mother was gone? After I stood by you during the divorce? You would leave me struggling like this? I always knew. I always knew you were selfish underneath it all. You're just as cold and ungrateful as I always suspected. The words hit me like physical blows. My face flushed hot. My throat closed up. Every instinct I had screamed at me to apologize, to explain, to promise I would figure something out. That's what I would have done 3 weeks ago. That's what I had done 100 times before. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I have to go, I said, and I hung up. My hands were shaking so badly I had to set the phone down on the counter. I stood there, gripping the edge of the sink, breathing slowly, waiting for the shame to crush me the way it always did. But something strange happened. The shame came. I felt it rising in my chest, that familiar, choking guilt. But it didn't stay. Beneath it was something else. Something clearer. I had said no. I had hung up. And I was still standing. The messages started coming that night. Text after text, each one more vicious than the last. I can't believe you would do this to me. After everything I sacrificed for your marriage. You were never really family. I see that now. Marcus was right about you. You're heartless. I read them with a strange detachment, like they were happening to someone else. Each time my phone buzzed, I screenshotted the message before reading it. I opened the floral notebook and added the screenshots to the growing collection. Date, time, exact words. My evidence was building. Then Marcus texted. First time in months. My mom is crying because of you. Real nice. I stared at that message for a long time. My ex-husband, who hadn't called his daughter in over a year, who had abandoned us both without a backward glance, was suddenly concerned about his mother's tears. Because the money had stopped. That's what they cared about. Not me, not Lily, just the money. I screenshotted his text and didn't respond. The final voicemail came 2 days later. Linda's voice was different now. No longer angry, but low and threatening, controlled. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, she said, but I want you to think very carefully about what you're doing. If you don't help, I'll tell everyone what kind of person you really are. I'll make sure everyone knows the truth about you, the real truth, and then we'll see how you like being alone. I listened to that message 3 times. The first time, I felt a flash of fear, the old terror of being exposed, being judged, being abandoned. The second time, I felt anger rising hot in my chest. And the third time, something settled over me like a warm blanket. Calm, steady, almost peaceful. Let them try. She wanted to scare me. And she thought if she threatened to tell people the truth, I'd come crawling back with my checkbook and my apologies, grateful to be forgiven. But she didn't know what I had. She didn't know about the floral notebook filled with 3 years of evidence. She didn't know about the screenshots and the bank statements and the photos of granite countertops paid for with my grocery money. And she didn't know that I was done being afraid. A week passed after Linda's threat. A week of silence from her, which should have been a relief, but somehow wasn't. It felt like the calm before a storm. That heavy electric stillness that makes your skin prickle. I kept waiting for something to happen. For the other shoe to drop. For the consequences of my rebellion to finally land on my head. And then, Marcus called. It was a Saturday morning. Lily was at a birthday party for a classmate, and I had the apartment to myself for a few hours. I was sitting on the couch with a cup of coffee, enjoying the rare quiet, when my phone buzzed on the cushion beside me. His name on the screen made my stomach flip. Marcus hadn't called me directly in over a year. Not since that cold, clipped conversation where he accused me of embarrassing him. I stared at the phone for a long moment, my finger hovering over the decline button. Every instinct told me to let it go to voicemail, to avoid the confrontation. to protect myself from whatever cruelty was waiting on the other end. But something else rose up inside me, something stronger than the fear. A voice that said, "Handle this now. End it now. You're ready." I answered. "Hello?" My voice was steadier than I expected. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing," Marcus said without preamble. "But my mother is elderly and sick, and you're abandoning her. She's been crying for days because of you." His voice was cold, condescending, dripping with that dismissive tone I remembered so well from our marriage. The tone that said I was beneath him, that my feelings didn't matter, that I should be grateful he was even bothering to speak to me. "I'm going to tell everyone what you did," he continued, "how you cut off a sick old woman who welcomed you into her family. Everyone is going to know exactly what kind of person you really are." I closed my eyes for a moment, took a breath, and when I spoke, my voice came out calm and clear. So calm, it almost didn't sound like me. "I sent over $14,000 in 3 years," I said. "For medical bills, I never saw a single receipt for. Your mother's kitchen renovation was finished the same month I paid her emergency surgery copay. I have the bank statements. I have the Facebook posts showing every vacation and every purchase. I have voice messages of her calling me ungrateful and selfish for daring to ask questions." Silence on the other end, complete stunned silence. I kept going. "I kept records, Marcus, every single payment, every single date, every single lie she told me about where that money was going. So if you want to tell people I stopped funding your lifestyle, go ahead. But I'll be sharing my records too. Every date, every amount, every screenshot of the beach vacations and casino trips that happened the same weeks I couldn't afford to buy our daughter new shoes." More silence. I could almost hear him recalculating, trying to figure out how to spin this, how to regain control of a conversation that had slipped completely out of his hands. When he finally spoke again, his voice was different. The cold confidence was gone, replaced by something I'd never heard from him before: uncertainty. "Look," he said, stumbling over the words. "There might have been some misunderstandings here. My mom, she exaggerates sometimes. You know how she is." "Well, maybe we can work this out." I almost laughed. After everything, after the years of dismissal, the months of silence, the accusations and threats. Now he wanted to work things out. Now that I had evidence. Now that his mother's scheme was exposed. "There's nothing to work out," I said. "Don't contact me again." And I hung up. I sat there for a long time after, my phone still warm in my hand, waiting for the feelings to come. The guilt, the shame, the desperate urge to call him back and apologize, to explain myself, to smooth things over the way I always had. But the feelings didn't come. Instead, there was just stillness. My hands weren't shaking. My chest wasn't tight. My stomach wasn't churning with acid. For the first time in 3 years, maybe longer, maybe since before the divorce, maybe since my wedding day, I felt quiet inside. I walked to my bedroom and opened the nightstand drawer. The floral notebook was right where I'd left it, filled with 3 years of evidence that I'd hoped I would never need to use. I picked it up and held it for a moment, feeling the weight of it in my hands. All those pages, all those payments, all those lies, documented in my own careful handwriting. I hadn't exposed them publicly. I hadn't posted the receipts on Facebook or sent them to Linda's church friends or taken out an ad in the newspaper. I'd just made it clear that I knew. That was enough. Sometimes, I've learned, the quietest justice is the most powerful. I want to pause here and ask you something. Have you ever had a moment where you finally stood your ground, even when your voice shook? A moment where you stopped apologizing and started telling the truth? If you have, I want to hear about it. Tell me in the comments. Not because I need to know, but because I think there's power in saying it out loud, in admitting that we found our strength, even when we thought we didn't have any left. The days after that phone call were strange. I kept expecting something to happen. Another call, a threatening letter, Linda showing up at my door. But there was nothing. No calls, no voicemails, no texts, no messages passed through mutual acquaintances. Just silence. At first, the silence felt eerie, like a trap waiting to spring. I would catch myself checking my phone obsessively, bracing for the next attack. But the attack never came. A week passed, then 2, then a month. And slowly, so slowly I almost didn't notice it happening, the silence stopped feeling like a threat. It started feeling like something else, like space, like air, like room to breathe for the first time in years. I would come home from work and not flinch when I looked at my phone. I would sit at my kitchen table without dreading the ringtone. I would go to bed at night without replaying conversations in my head, without rehearsing defenses against accusations that hadn't come yet. My shoulders started to relax. The permanent knot in my neck began to loosen. I slept through the night for the first time in as long as I could remember. They went silent after that. No apology, no admission, no acknowledgement that any of it had ever happened. Just nothing. And in that nothing, I finally found room to breathe. The first month without sending a payment felt strange, almost uncomfortable, like wearing shoes that didn't quite fit. I kept waiting for the guilt to hit, that crushing wave of shame I'd felt every time I hesitated before. But it didn't come. What came instead was something I hadn't expected. Money. Not a windfall, not a lottery win, just my regular paycheck, sitting in my account without a $4 or $5 or $600 hole punched through it. I stared at my bank balance on my phone one evening after Lily was in bed, and I couldn't quite believe what I was seeing. There was money left over. After rent and utilities and groceries and gas, there was actually money left. I sat at my kitchen table and cried. Not from sadness or fear or shame, from relief. Pure, overwhelming relief. For 3 years, and I had lived in a constant state of financial terror. Every grocery trip was a calculation. Every bill was a negotiation with myself about what I could put off until next month. Every small expense felt like a betrayal of my obligation to Linda. And now, suddenly, that weight was gone. I could buy groceries without checking my account 3 times. I could fill up my gas tank all the way instead of putting in just enough to get through the week. I could breathe. The first thing I did with that extra money was take Lily shopping for shoes. Real shoes. New shoes. Not from the secondhand store, not hand-me-downs from a coworker's daughter, but brand new shoes from the store at the mall with the bright lights and the helpful salespeople. Lily sat on the little bench and tried on pair after pair, her eyes wide with disbelief. I can really pick any ones I want?" she asked, like she couldn't quite trust it. "Any ones you want, baby," I said, "as long as they fit." She chose a pair of sparkly purple sneakers that lit up when she walked. They cost $42, more than I would have spent on groceries for a week during the Linda years. But watching her skip through the mall, pausing every few steps to admire the flashing lights on her feet, I knew it was worth every cent. The second thing I did was enroll in a course I'd been dreaming about for years, an advanced medical billing certification, the kind that could lead to supervisory positions, better pay, actual benefits. I'd looked at it so many times online, always closing the browser before I could get too attached. It cost $300, which might as well have been $3 million during the years I was sending money to Linda. But now, for the first time, I could afford it. I enrolled the same night I found the program again, before I could talk myself out of it. I studied at the kitchen table after Lily went to bed, My textbook spread out beside the floral notebook that still sat in my nightstand drawer. Sometimes I would take the notebook out and flip through it, not to torture myself, but to remind myself why I was doing this. Every page of evidence was a page of my past. Every payment I'd recorded was a version of me I was leaving behind. The course took 4 months to complete. 4 months of late nights and practice exams and moments of doubt when I wondered if I was too old, too tired, too broken to become anything new. But I finished. And I took the certification exam on a rainy Saturday morning while Lily stayed with Dana. And when I got the email 2 weeks later telling me I'd passed, I sat in my car in the parking lot of the testing center and sobbed with joy. I had done something. I had become something. I was still capable of growth, even after everything that had tried to shrink me. The new job came 3 months later, a clinic on the other side of town, nicer than anywhere I'd worked before. The interview felt different than any I'd had in years. I walked in standing straight, speaking clearly, not apologizing for taking up space. They offered me a position with a real salary and health insurance and 2 weeks of paid vacation. When the HR manager shook my hand and welcomed me to the team, I felt something warm bloom in my chest. Dignity. That's what it was. Then I was being paid with dignity, not fear. The changes in our life accumulated slowly, the way snow gathers on a windowsill. A new bedspread for my room, soft and white, like sleeping in a cloud. A plant on the kitchen windowsill that I actually remembered to water. Sunday morning pancakes became our tradition. Lily and me standing side by side at the stove, her stirring the batter while I flipped. The apartment that had once felt like a prison, a place I went to worry and cry and count pennies, started to feel like something else. Like a home, like a sanctuary, like a place where 2 people were building a life that belonged only to them. One afternoon, I was standing at the counter making dinner, really making it, not just throwing together whatever was cheapest. I had music playing from my phone. Lily was at the table doing her homework. And I was humming. I didn't even realize I was doing it until Lily suddenly looked up, her face splitting into a grin. "Mama," she said, "you're humming." I stopped, startled. "I am?" "You are. You're humming a song. You never hum anymore." I stood there, spatula in hand, and realized she was right. I hadn't hummed in years, hadn't sung in the shower or danced while doing dishes or let music move through me without thinking. I'd been too worried, too stressed, too busy surviving to do anything as frivolous as humming. But here I was, humming, like a person who had room inside her for something other than fear. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw something that made my heart swell to twice its size. She wasn't worried. She wasn't tiptoeing around my moods or watching my face for signs of tears. She was just a kid, out doing homework, happy that her mom was humming in the kitchen. That was what healing looked like. Not a dramatic transformation, not a movie montage of triumph and victory, just a child who wasn't scared anymore, just a mother who could hum while she cooked. I didn't know who I would become without that weight. I didn't know how much I'd been carrying until I finally put it down. But my daughter knew. She saw the change before I did, and one evening, she said something that made everything, every hard choice, every terrifying moment, every time I'd had to trust myself when everything told me not to, worth it. Present day. I'm standing in my kitchen with Lily beside me. She's 8 years old now, tall for her age, with her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail and a dish towel thrown over her shoulder like she's a professional chef. We're making dinner together, pasta with homemade sauce, her favorite. She's stirring the pot while I chop tomatoes, and the kitchen smells like garlic and basil and something else I can't quite name. Something like peace. Mama, Lily says, peering into the bubbling pot with serious concentration. What should we cook this weekend? I was thinking maybe tacos, or that chicken thing with the lemon, or, oh, what about homemade pizza? We could put whatever we want on it. I laugh at her enthusiasm. This is our thing now, planning our weekend meals together, turning cooking into an adventure instead of a chore. Let's do pizza, I say. We can make the dough from scratch. Her face lights up like I've just told her we're going to Disneyland. Really? From scratch? That's so fancy, Mama. I watch her bounce back to stirring the sauce, narrating her technique like she's hosting her own cooking show, and I feel something swell in my chest. Gratitude. That's what it is. Gratitude so big it almost hurts. I think about where we were 3 years ago. The trembling hands, the ringing phone, the question that broke me open. Mama, why do you cry every time your phone rings? She doesn't ask that question anymore. She doesn't watch my face for signs of tears or go quiet when my phone buzzes. She doesn't carry my stress in her small body because I'm not drowning in it anymore. Instead, she asks what we're cooking. She asks if we can have pancakes on Sunday. She asks if she can pick the movie for family night. Normal questions, happy questions. The questions of a child who feels safe. After dinner, after the dishes are washed and Lily is settled in her room reading before bed, I go to my nightstand and open the drawer. The floral notebook is still there, right where I left it. I haven't looked at it in months, but I haven't thrown it away either. I pick it up and carry it to the kitchen table. The same table where I used to sit, trembling and exhausted, recording payments I couldn't afford. The same table where I added up 3 years of exploitation and finally saw the truth. I flipped through the pages slowly. My own handwriting, neat and careful, documenting every lie I believed. The screenshots taped beside my entries, vacations and renovations paid for with my sacrifice. The word evidence written at the top of a page in trembling letters. And then, at the very back, a page I added months ago. A single entry, dated the day after Lily and I made our first Sunday pancakes together. Today, I cooked with my daughter. No phone call interrupted. No fear. Just us. I close the notebook and hold it for a moment, feeling the weight of it in my hands. It's lighter than it used to feel. Not because anything has changed about the paper or the binding, but because I've changed. This notebook used to be a record of my shame, evidence of how thoroughly I'd been used, how foolish I'd been, how much I'd sacrificed for people who never deserved it. But now it means something different. And now it's a reminder of the woman I became when I finally trusted myself. A reminder that I wasn't crazy, that my gut was smarter than my guilt, that walking away was the bravest thing I ever did. I don't throw the notebook away. Instead, I put it back in the drawer, right on top where I can see it. Not hidden, not shameful, just there. A closed chapter that I can choose to revisit or choose to leave alone. Either way, it doesn't control me anymore. If you're hearing this and you recognize yourself in any part of this story, I want to speak directly to you for a moment. Maybe you're in the middle of something right now, a relationship that drains you, an obligation that crushes you, a person who has turned your kindness into a chain around your neck. Maybe you've been called selfish for having boundaries, and maybe you've been told you're ungrateful for asking questions. Maybe you've started to believe that love means enduring, that family means sacrifice, that being a good person means giving until there's nothing left. I believed all of those things once, and I was wrong. Real love doesn't demand your destruction. Real family doesn't exploit your guilt. Being a good person doesn't mean setting yourself on fire to keep other people warm. Boundaries aren't walls. They're bridges. Bridges back to yourself. Back to the person you were before you learned to shrink. Back to the mother, the daughter, the woman you're still capable of becoming. I used to think walking away made me weak. That leaving meant I had failed. But I've learned something different now. Sometimes walking away is the strongest thing you can do. But not because it's easy, God knows it isn't easy, but because it's true. It's honest. It's the first step toward a life that belongs to you instead of the people who want to use you. My daughter doesn't ask why I cry anymore. She asks what we're cooking for dinner. And that question, that simple, beautiful question, is worth more than every dollar I ever sent. It's worth more than the approval of people who never saw me as anything but a resource. It's worth more than the false comfort of belonging to a family that only loved what I could give them. If this story touched your heart, I want to ask you for something. Give it a like so this mama knows she's not alone. Subscribe to Jessica Stories Vault so you don't miss the next story I pour my heart into. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. Yeah, it brings me so much comfort to know that women all over the world are listening. That somewhere out there, at 2 a.m, or during a lunch break, or while folding laundry, another woman is hearing this and feeling a little less crazy, a little less alone. If you've ever had to make a hard choice to protect yourself or your children, share what you're comfortable sharing. Your story might be exactly what another woman needs to hear tonight. And if you want to support this channel in an extra special way, you can leave a super thanks or check out our membership options. Every bit of support helps me keep telling these stories. Stories that I wish someone had told me when I was eating rice and beans and crying every time my phone rang. Before I go, I want to leave you with one question. Which part of this story felt closest to your own life? Think about it. And remember this. Your gut is smarter than your guilt. Trust it. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And thank you for reminding me, with every view and every comment, that we're not walking this road alone. Take care of yourself, friend. You deserve it more than you know.